Barron Trump stood in the corner of the grand ballroom, observing the glittering crowd. The gala was in full swing, people in elegant attire mingling, laughing and toasting with champagne. The air was filled with the soft hum of high society, but Barron, ever the introvert, preferred to stay on the sidelines. His mind wandered, taking in the conversations around him, until the sudden crack of a voice cut through the noise. "Excuse me, sir," a stern voice interrupted. Barron turned, confused, to see a staff member standing before him. The man's expression was stern, his posture rigid. The music and chatter seemed to fade into the background as Barron's mind raced. This was supposed to be an event he could relax at, an evening he could enjoy without the weight of his family name. But now, this encounter felt anything but ordinary. "I'm going to have to ask you to leave," the staff member said, his tone final, with no room for negotiation. Barron blinked, a cold knot forming in his stomach. He hadn't expected this. The shock was evident on his face as he glanced around, hoping for some indication of a mistake. He had been invited, just like everyone else. There must have been a misunderstanding, right? "Leave? What do you mean?" Barron's voice faltered slightly, his confusion morphing into a mixture of disbelief and frustration. The staff member didn't budge, his gaze unflinching. "I'm sorry, but you're not allowed to stay. Please follow me." A wave of discomfort washed over Barron as the reality of the situation sank in. He wasn't being asked to leave by mistake. This was intentional. His mind raced as the weight of the moment hit him. He was in the center of the room, surrounded by important figures, his name known by many, and yet here he was, being escorted out. "I don't understand," Barron said, his words more pleading than demanding. "I was invited. There must be some mistake." But the staff member remained unmoved, his hand firmly guiding Barron toward the exit. The whispers started immediately, as guests around them began to take notice. Some watched curiously, others with barely concealed judgment. Barron felt every pair of eyes on him, the heat of their gazes like an unbearable weight. The stares dug deep, amplifying his humiliation. How could this happen to him in front of all these people? His chest tightened as he walked toward the door. Each step felt heavier than the last. The music, the chatter, the laughter, everything seemed to drown out, leaving only the pounding of his heart in his ears. Barron knew he couldn't turn around, not with all the eyes on him. But with every step, his frustration grew, the sting of rejection sharp in his chest. Why had this happened? What had he done to deserve being singled out like this? He reached the door, the staff member still at his side, and as he was led outside, Barron felt the weight of the evening fall on him. The night he had imagined, one of quiet enjoyment, had turned into an experience of public rejection. The cold air hit him as the door shut behind him, the last remnants of the gala fading away. Standing alone, outside the building he had just walked into, Barron couldn't escape the question that burned in his mind. Why was he kicked out? Outside the venue, Barron stood alone, the door quietly closing behind him. The sharp night air felt colder than it should have, as though it had turned on him, too. He took a few steps away from the entrance, still unable to fully grasp what had just happened. His mind was spinning, each thought more jumbled than the last. He ran his hand through his hair, trying to steady his racing heart. Why? The question pounded in his head, demanding an answer that seemed so elusive. His pride kept him from letting anyone see how deeply this had affected him. But in the silence of the night, he felt small, smaller than he ever had in front of all those people inside. Barron was used to people recognizing his name, his status, even his family. But tonight, that recognition had failed him. Instead, he'd been treated as if he were invisible, as if he didn't belong. He pulled out his phone, trying to call his mother, Melania. His fingers trembled as he pressed the screen, his heart beating faster with every ring that went unanswered. Why isn't she picking up? He wondered. She was always there for him, calm, reassuring. In times like these, when Barron didn't have the answers, she usually did. But tonight, even her usual steady presence was missing. The pain of the injustice lingered, a heavy weight in his chest. The organizers had been clear. He had to leave, but no explanation was given, no reason, just an abrupt, cold dismissal. Barron had tried to reason with them, but their response had been unyielding, as if they had already decided his fate the moment they laid eyes on him. But why? What had happened? Had someone complained? Was it something personal? The questions gnawed at him, and the answers refused to come. He stood there in front of the venue, staring at the grand entrance he had just walked through moments ago. The beautiful doors that had once invited him in now felt like a symbol of rejection. The world inside had felt warm, full of laughter and luxury. But out here, standing alone, The weight of isolation pressed down on him. He wasn't just outside. He felt as though he were on the outside of something much bigger. What was it about me? He wondered. He wasn't used to being judged like this, not publicly, not in front of the very people who should have been on his side. The reality of the situation sank in like a stone in his stomach. This wasn't just about the event, Barron thought bitterly. This wasn't a simple mistake. It wasn't just a bad call by a staff member. This was something deeper, something that had been aimed at him, something personal. His chest tightened, and he felt a surge of anger rising, but it was quickly swallowed by an overwhelming feeling of helplessness. His thoughts drifted to his mom. Barron had always known that no matter what happened, Melania would be there to help him make sense of it all. But as he dialed her number again, he couldn't shake the thought. Would she even show up for him tonight? The seconds dragged on, the world feeling emptier by the minute. Barron stood there alone, unsure of how long it would take for his mother to arrive, unsure if she would even be able to fix this. But deep down, he knew that in this moment, he needed more than just comfort. He needed answers. And as the cold night air pressed in around him, the uncertainty of whether or not those answers would come weighed heavily on his heart. The night air was thick with the weight of Barron's isolation as he stood by the venue's entrance, his gaze locked on the luxurious building he had just been forced to leave. The crowd had thinned inside, and all he could hear was the distant hum of the city's nightlife, so far removed from the world of wealth and privilege that had so unceremoniously rejected him. His phone, still in his hand, offered no comfort. Its screen lit up with unanswered calls and messages from a night he was no longer a part of. Just as Barron began to lose himself in the swirling confusion of what had just occurred, a sleek black car pulled up by the curb, its headlights cutting through the shadows. The door opened, and there she was, Melania. Her presence seemed to still the chaos of the night in an instant. Her heels clicked against the pavement as she stepped out of the car with the same poise and grace that always seemed to surround her. But tonight, as her eyes found Barron standing there, she paused. Her expression softened for a split second before the protective mother within her took over, and her face hardened with concern. Without a word, she walked toward him, her steps deliberate and swift. Barron's heart skipped as he saw her approach, and for the first time since he had been forced out, a spark of comfort flickered within him. She was here now. Her presence, though calm and composed, held a sense of unspoken power. Melania was never one to back down, and Barron knew that she wouldn't let this stand. "Barron," she said softly as she reached him, her voice like a balm against the rawness of the evening. "What happened?" Barron felt his throat tighten. The frustration, confusion, and humiliation of the moment rushed back in full force, and his voice cracked when he finally spoke. "They asked me to leave. I didn't do anything. I tried to explain, but they just kicked me out, Mom." Her gaze never wavered as she listened, absorbing every word with a silent intensity. The hurt in Barron's voice struck her deeply. A wave of protective anger surged within her, but she kept her composure, just as she always did. Melania was the rock in this family, steady, strong, and unwavering. But tonight, the injustice her son had faced was something she couldn't easily push aside. "I don't understand," Barron continued, looking down at the ground. "It's like they just decided I wasn't welcome. No reason. Just get out. I didn't even know how to respond. I'm used to, being treated differently, but not like this. Not in front of everyone." Melania's eyes softened briefly as she took a step closer, placing a gentle hand on his shoulder. The warmth of her touch steadied Barron's nerves, but he could see the fire beginning to burn behind her eyes. She was calm, but there was a clear resolve in her gaze. This wasn't just about her son. This was bigger, much bigger. Her mind raced as she processed everything. The treatment Barron had endured wasn't just a simple mistake. It was an act of disregard, of injustice, and Melania knew there was more at play. This wasn't a random incident. It felt orchestrated, like Barron was being targeted. And if there was one thing she understood, it was how to confront injustice head-on. Barron looked up at her, his eyes filled with a mixture of gratitude and concern. "What are you going to do?" Melania paused, her gaze sharpening as she weighed the situation. It wasn't just about getting Barron back into the event. It was about confronting those who had wronged him, holding them accountable for their actions. "I'll take care of it," she said firmly, her voice leaving no room for doubt. "They'll understand the consequences of this mistake." As she spoke, Barron felt a deep sense of reassurance wash over him. His mother was a force to be reckoned with, and now she was ready to fight on his behalf. Melania's heels clicked sharply against the marble floor as she approached the grand entrance of the venue. The night air had grown colder, but it didn't matter to her. Her determination, as always, was unwavering. Barron had been humiliated, and that was something Melania would never allow, especially when the injustice was so clear. As she neared the door, she steadied herself, her face a perfect mask of composure. But inside, a fierce fire burned. No one makes my son feel less than what he is, she thought, her resolve hardening. Barron, standing a few paces behind her, watched his mother's every move. He was still reeling from the experience, confused and hurt by what had happened. His mind replayed the event over and over, but now, in the shadow of Melania's presence, there was a glimmer of hope. He had always known that when his mother stood up, people listened. But this time, it wasn't just about making a statement, it was about righting a wrong. Inside the venue, the atmosphere had shifted. The event was winding down, the staff busy with their final duties. They hadn't expected Melania's approach. Her presence was so commanding that it immediately cut through the noise. The chatter inside stilled, and all eyes shifted toward her as she walked toward the main organizer, a man who had been overseeing the event. He seemed unprepared for the weight of her gaze, her steady stride. Melania's voice broke through the stillness, low but powerful, with a firmness that couldn't be ignored. "I'm here to understand why my son was treated this way," she said, her words cutting through the tension in the air. The crowd felt the shift instantly. This wasn't just a mother asking for answers. This was a woman demanding justice. The event organizers shifted uneasily, their eyes flicking nervously between one another. The energy in the room changed. No longer was there a sense of luxury and grandeur, but a palpable discomfort, as they realized this wasn't going to be a conversation they could sweep under the rug. The staff scrambled, trying to explain, but their words fell flat in the face of Melania's unwavering composure. Her eyes, cold and unyielding, locked onto the lead organizer. "Why was my son kicked out?" she asked again, her voice unflinching, but there was a hidden weight beneath her calm words. She was not merely seeking an answer, she was demanding it. The tension in the room escalated as the truth began to unravel. One of the staff members, looking nervous under Melania's piercing gaze, stepped forward. "It was a mistake. There was some miscommunication with the guest list. We didn't mean to," he trailed off, clearly flustered. Melania's expression remained the same, but Barron could see the quiet power in her eyes. This wasn't just about a mistake. It was about accountability. "You'll ensure this doesn't happen again," she said firmly. There was no room for further discussion. The organizers, now visibly uncomfortable, nodded in agreement, their remorse clear. The realization of their blunder hung in the air like a cloud. For the first time that evening, the staff seemed genuinely apologetic. They hadn't expected to be called out with such directness, and they were clearly taken aback by Melania's authority. Barron, watching from the doorway, felt a rush of gratitude flood through him. His mother had done more than resolve the situation. She had restored his dignity in front of a crowd that had so quickly turned its back on him. With a final, knowing glance at the staff, Melania turned back to Barron. She didn't need to say anything. The victory was in her calmness, her grace, and in the way she had demanded respect, not just for herself, but for her son. With the misunderstanding cleared up, the atmosphere in the ballroom shifted. What had been an evening of tension and discomfort for Barron now became a space of subtle recognition. The organizers had offered their apologies, and Barron, for the first time that night, was invited back into the venue. As he stepped through the grand doors once more, it felt different this time. The soft hum of conversations, once distant and indifferent, now seemed to pause as he re-entered. The eyes of the crowd, which had previously been filled with judgment and curiosity, now held something else, respect. Barron hesitated for just a moment at the entrance, looking around the room. The once elevated atmosphere now felt softer somehow. As he walked further in, he felt the shift in how people perceived him. They had seen him being escorted out, but now they were seeing him re-enter with a quiet dignity, something his mother had fought for. The murmurs began to change. The whispers were no longer mocking but curious, almost respectful. Barron wasn't just the son of famous parents anymore. He was a person who had been wronged and was now being recognized for his strength. The tension from earlier melted away, and in its place, a sense of quiet pride took root in Barron's heart. But it wasn't just about being allowed back in. It was about the respect his mother had commanded when she'd stepped in to resolve the issue. Melania had done more than intervene. She had restored Barron's dignity. For Barron, the moment wasn't just about a physical return. It was about reclaiming his space in the world, about standing tall not because of his family name, but because of his own worth. The apology from the organizers had been a necessary step, but it was Melania's quiet strength, her unshakable confidence that had made the real difference. Barron had watched as his mother, with no fanfare or drama, had faced down the situation and turned it into something that would leave a lasting impact, not just on the event staff but on everyone in that room. Barron's heart swelled with a mix of relief and gratitude. He looked over at his mother, her presence calm and steady as always, but now there was something more in her gaze. It was a look that said, "You've got this." He knew, deep down, that without her intervention, this night could have gone very differently. His mother had always been a symbol of resilience to him, but tonight, she had taught him something more profound. Sometimes, standing up for yourself wasn't just about speaking up. It was about knowing when to ask for help and who to trust. Melania's intervention had done more than solve the problem. It had reminded Barron of the power of family, of the strength that came when someone stood by you, unconditionally. As they shared a brief, knowing glance, Barron felt something inside him shift. He wasn't just a passive observer of his family's world anymore. He had his own place in it, his own sense of authority and belonging. His mother had not only fought for him in this moment, but had given him the tools to fight for himself. And for Barron, that was the greatest gift of all. As the last notes of music faded and the crowd began to thin, Barron and Melania stood side by side, making their way toward the exit. The night that had begun with such confusion and embarrassment now seemed to hold a quiet sense of closure. The grand ballroom, once filled with the hum of conversation and the clink of glasses, was now a hollow shell of what it had been just hours earlier. Barron couldn't help but reflect on the dramatic turn of events. He had entered the venue expecting an evening of ease, but had been met with unexpected rejection. But that same night had ended in triumph, because of his mother, because of the strength of family. As they stepped into the cool night air, Barron felt an overwhelming sense of relief. His body, which had been tense with frustration for so long, finally relaxed. The weight of humiliation had been replaced by something far more powerful, a sense of pride, a recognition that no matter what the world threw at him, he had the strength to rise above it. But it wasn't just his own strength that had seen him through. It was Melania's unwavering support. The feeling of safety that washed over him in that moment, walking beside her, reminded him of the power of family, of knowing that, no matter what, someone always had your back. Barron glanced over at his mother, who walked beside him with her usual poise. Her face was calm, yet there was a glint in her eyes that spoke volumes, of strength, of resolve, and of quiet triumph. They didn't need words to communicate, they never did. In the face of everything that had happened, Melania had shown Barron how to navigate the world with dignity, how to stand tall even when it seemed the odds were against you. She had fought for him without hesitation, without fear of what anyone might think. And in doing so, she had taught him that it wasn't about winning every battle. It was about knowing your worth. As they walked away from the event, Barron's mind continued to turn over the lessons of the night. The world, he realized, could be unfair, even harsh at times. He'd seen that firsthand tonight. But there was power in understanding your own value, in knowing that no matter what others said or did, you had something that couldn't be taken away. His mother had been that reminder for him. She had fought not just for him, but for their shared belief that no one should ever be made to feel less than they are. In that quiet moment, with the sounds of the city surrounding them, Barron felt a deep sense of gratitude. He didn't need validation from anyone in that room. All he needed was the unwavering belief of the one person who had always stood by him. Melania's quiet smile, the one she gave him now, spoke more than words ever could. It was a smile that said, "I've got you," a smile that reminded him that no matter what happened in the world, no matter how unfair things might feel, he would always have his mother, and together they could face anything. As they made their way to the car, Barron realized that this experience would stay with him for a long time, not just as a lesson in resilience, but as a reminder that strength isn't always loud. Sometimes it's quiet, steady, and deeply rooted in the love and support of those who truly understand you. Have you ever faced a moment of public rejection or injustice? How did you handle it? Share your thoughts and experiences in the comments below. Let's talk about the power of family, standing up for what's right, and finding strength in the toughest moments.